In this recording, I will discuss Montaigne's essay titled Of Cannibals. In this essay, Montaigne writes about the inhabitants of the New World, specifically Brazil in 1557. This is just around the time that the Europeans discovered the New World for the very first time, and Montaigne was conversing with a man who lived in the New World for about 12 years, a European man, I assume. And he says that the man is a plain and very ignorant fellow, and therefore we can take his word for truth, because people who are ignorant or just plain speaking men don't generally elaborate or attempt to make what they experience or what they observe more credible by adding facts that weren't actually experienced. So Montaigne argues that we can believe this man, what he tells us about the New World. So to begin the essay, Montaigne states that just as the Greeks and I believe the Turks, when they invaded Italy, the generals of the army, I think it was King Pyrrhus maybe, and another king, they said that they saw no barbarous behavior in these so-called barbarians. So the Greeks called everyone that wasn't a Greek a barbarian. However, these generals of the army saw no barbarous behavior in these men of Italy, the Romans, because the Romans were very ordered, very military disciplined in military. So the kings were surprised at this, and from this example, Montaigne says that we should be cautious about believing what is commonly held to be true about a certain group of people or a certain circumstance or fact about reality. So we should always be cautious about common opinion. We shouldn't rely upon common opinion to base our own opinions. We should rely instead upon pure reason and the eye of reason and our own observations and experience rather than the vulgar opinion. Okay, so moving onward to the actual life of these inhabitants of the New World. So just as the Romans weren't actually barbarous, even though the Greeks called them barbarians, just as the Europeans call these Brazilians savages or barbarians, they aren't barbarous in their beliefs, their attitudes, their customs. Montaigne even states that their condition of life is actually very utopian, with very little human artifice and manipulation. They are able to live in a society in which there is no poverty, there is no disparity between the rich and the poor. No one goes hungry. It's very rare to see a sick person or hear about a sick person in the New World amongst the inhabitants. It's very rare to see a toothless, blind, and native crooked with old age. So they seem to be a very healthy group of people. They live in a very temperate climate along the seashore and surrounded by mountains. They are continually at war with other nations beyond the mountains. However, they do not dispute over territory or resources, natural resources, or any financial or monetary gain. They have no concept of finance. And let me add one more thing. They have no concept of treachery, deceit, corruption, and various other immoral acts. They have no conception of these words, because it's not practiced in the New World. They have no use for it. Okay, and that's why Montaigne believes it's so utopian-like. Okay, back to the wars. Okay, so the only thing they attempt to win by going to war is honor, glory, and valor. So their moral code is really has two heads. One is to be valorous in battle, and the second is to love their wives. I've already treated the first one, to be valorous in battle, and they believe that um, to die and to be eaten or to be tortured was was nothing to them. What really mattered was reserving their preserving their will from being conquered. So Montaigne says that no true victory does not exist until the conquered admits defeat. So valor consists not in the strength of the limbs or the arms of a certain man, but rather the strength of his own will and determination. So a man can be killed, but he cannot be conquered unless he submits to it, unless his will submits to it. So these people had this notion, had this idea of valor constantly in their mind, so that if they were taken prisoner, uh, the enemy would attempt to frighten them into admitting defeat, into asking for forgiveness and pardon. They would terrify them with the tortures which await them at the end of their life. They would dismember them. They would eat them. They would burn them alive. They'd cook them, etc. But the prisoners would never submit to defeat. They would remain defiant to the very end. They'd spit in their captors' faces. They would ridicule their captors. They would provoke them. They would say that I've eaten your ancestors. I've humiliated your wives and your children, etc., etc. They would taunt them to the very end. So that's one very interesting thing to take away from this essay, because I'd been reading 1984 by George Orwell very recently, and in the very last few pages, Winston is defeated. His will is defeated. So he's broken down physically, and then finally he's just incapable of withstanding the persuasion of Big Brother, and he loses his will to remain independent of Big Brother and uninfluenced by Big Brother. He finally submits both physically and mentally. So it's very interesting to note that the natives were able to remain defiant and remain unconquered in their will to the very end, even in the face of imminent torture, death, physical bodily harm, extreme severe bodily harm. Okay, so I touched upon that aspect of their morality. The second aspect was to love their wives, and maybe I should talk about daily habits. I think I've already stated that they began their day by eating a large meal. This was the only meal that they would eat during the day, so they ate a very large meal. And throughout the rest of the day, they would engage in dancing and play and recreation and leisurely activities. There was no employment, but leisurely activities, another utopian type of circumstance in this land. And concerning the wives, they said to love their wives. The wives were mostly involved with preparing a certain type of drink that they would drink throughout the day. So they didn't drink with their meal in the morning, but they would drink throughout the day. And it wasn't, I believe it was an alcoholic drink, but it wasn't very strong. It was pleasing to the stomach. What else? Yeah, so love your wife, and the wife's only concern was for her husband's honor and glory and valor. And the more valorous a man, the more wives he had. So wives would often seek out other wives for their husband in order to to aggrandize his valor and his courage. So it's very interesting to note that the women of Brazil actually encouraged their husbands to take on new wives, and actually solicited other wives for their husbands, other women for their husbands, which is the complete opposite of European culture, where women are actually very mistrustful about men spending time with other women, and would be indignant at the fact or thought of their husband lying with another woman. Okay, what else? What else? Yeah, I believe that's it. Yeah, so the men during the day would often hunt while the women prepared the drinks. They would dance. Yeah, that's it. What else? Okay, so the last thing I wanted to speak about, some of the natives were brought over to Europe to see France, and to see how the Europeans lived. And Montaigne asked one of the natives what he thought about European culture, and one of them responded that they were astonished that the haves, and the Native Americans or Brazilians would refer to other men as haves. So they saw, humanity as united, as one. So I'd refer to someone else as my other half. So everyone was their other half. So they were astonished that haves were walking around France starving, lean, obviously bereft of the necessaries of life. And, they were begging on the streets. They were the poor vagabonds that you see begging on the streets for food, very lean, very sickly, pale, and so forth, etc. And the native was astonished that those haves would suffer such inequality and injustice without grabbing the others by the throats or setting their houses on fire. And the others are obviously well fed and well attired. So the native was astonished that these indignant or indigent haves would suffer this inequality and injustice without taking action to rectify this injustice and inequality. Okay, what else? Oh yeah, so Montaigne also asked one of the leaders of a native tribe what was the greatest advantage he derived from that position of superiority which he had amongst his tribe members, amongst his tribe. And the native Brazilian replies that the greatest advantage he receives from his position of superiority was that he was able to lead, was not able, but he had the privilege of marching at the head of the army into war. So the greatest advantage he believed was to lead his army, to lead his people into war. And that's it. Yep. Very interesting essay, I must say.